Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, and I edit the newsletter When the Field is Online. And we've been focusing on archival research. So I'm pleased to be joined today by Lara Szypszak, who works at the Library of Congress. So thank you, Lara, for joining me. And I look forward to hearing about archival research opportunities, but why don't you just start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So as you mentioned, my name is Lara Szypszak. I'm a senior reference specialist here in the manuscript division at the Library of Congress. The manuscript division is one of about 20 research centers and reading rooms at the Library of Congress. We're part of the Special Collections Directorate. The agency has over 3,000 staff members. It's an entire community, and every unit, division, directorate has their own mission and piece of the puzzle. The entire ecosystem as a whole is there to acquire, arrange, catalog, preserve, describe, digitize, everything that has to do with archives. The manuscript division in particular collects and organizes and serves primarily personal records and some agency records and organizational records like the NAACP papers, documenting American history and culture. So we are kind of a sibling to the National Archives, whereas that's the formal repository for government records. We get some of the real fun personal stuff, the letters, the diaries, but also formal records as well here in the manuscript division.
Well, our readers are a little bit familiar because I shared a number of links to some of the areas of the archives that include recordings and video, film clips, and all kinds of materials. Not only written documents. But just to start with, for researchers who are using archival material they find at the Library of Congress, what kind of permissions or agreements are needed? How can researchers respect those sources?
Yeah, absolutely. And under Dr. Hayden, the Librarian of Congress, a big part of our mission is to reach all Americans, but the whole world comes here. But you really just have to be 16 with a government ID to get in, which is kind of a cool thing. And a lot of people misunderstand. The Library of Congress does not just serve Congress. We serve the country. And so a lot of folks will come in. We do have in the manuscript division rules and regulations that folks will read over and agree to abide by. But each collection has a unique access advisory, if you will. A lot of it will be in the public domain, for example, but others might be restricted due to donor restrictions or just an agreement, family agreement, copyright agreement, or copyright law in place. So often it depends on what they're looking at. So one example might be our very popular Supreme Court collections. And in some cases, the whole collection will be open. In other cases, certain boxes may remain closed just for the life of the justice or for the lives of the sitting justices on particular cases. So it's part of our job is helping folks navigate all of those unique aspects of every collection that they're interested in. But for the most part, anyone can come in and use the collections. We don't allow food and drinks and pens and the typical thing that an archive might have restricted, but we're much more open than people realize.
So if someone were going to visit to do research in person, would they make contact first to determine whether the materials they are interested in are available?
Sure. And that's an important question because we cannot emphasize enough how much we want people to reach out to us through Ask a Librarian or calling us, not because we are going to tell them they can't come, but because we want them to have the most effective research visit that they possibly can. In some cases, collections are stored in our offsite facility, and it does require a couple of days advance notice for us to just bring it in. And so sometimes there's nothing we can do if we didn't know a patron is trying to view the material that's a truck's delivery away. But if folks let us know, like, hey, I'm coming, I want to see this collection, it's stored offsite, here are the boxes that I want to see. Or if they're just getting started and they don't know how to navigate our collections, we're happy to send finding aids, explain the best methods for locating those collections, how to interpret the restrictions, how to even zero in on specific box numbers that they might want to see. And we do have historians and archivists in the division that may have a more focused knowledge on some of those collections. So for example, our historian on science and technology is going to be a great person to consult if you're interested in the Sagan papers. He knows it so intimately, and he might be able to better recommend something. Or the archivist who processed the collection may remember, oh, when I was organizing this, I saw this great letter. It would be perfect for your topic. And so we all work as a team and complement each other. But reference staff really just want people to reach out, not because they need an appointment, but because we want to make that visit the most effective visit it can be.
Right, which would be important, especially if you're having to travel, to come. And, while, in a moment we'll talk about the online resources, I wanted to emphasize that, not everything is digitized. There are, times where, you can use your online connections to find, where the materials are located that you want to study, and to have the kind of communication you've just described. But, we still have to do the hands-on work to read, and that's and sort and understand those. But maybe shift a little bit and talk, about what is available online, and if you have any examples that you want to share. Again, I've linked to some of the materials, so I know there's just a wealth of resources available on a lot of different topics. So maybe you could share a bit about that.
Yeah, and I will say it's a drop in the bucket. I think, somebody threw out an artificial number saying if we were to digitize all of our collections at the rate that we can digitize, it would take 1,000 years to even tackle what we currently exist. And that doesn't include the incoming collections that we continue to receive every day. Part of that is the high archival standards that are involved in digitizing material. It's not, you can't send our collections through a feeder and digitize 1,000 pages in a day. It requires special handling. It requires people who have experience and knowledge in handling fragile material. It requires catalogers. It requires historians to put that material in context, to organize it, to match it up to our finding aids. So often a lot of folks, especially after the pandemic, are so used to things just automatically coming online. Like, wouldn't this be automated? Couldn't you do this so quickly? But with this rare material, this fragile material that is hundreds of thousands of documents, I mean, we're in the millions of items. It just takes a long time. It takes a lot of people. But there is a wealth of material online. I think I counted it's well over 120 collections just from the manuscript division are online. And I think it's over 500 distinct collections from across the library. But that doesn't include all of our general collections books and a lot of the audio recordings. So just because a collection is online, that could include millions of items. So some people might feel underwhelmed by 120 of our collections, but there's millions of items in each, in that. What we call an item is also up for debate. A single letter is an item, but a 10-page letter is one item as well. And so if you think about the letters you write to your family, there's probably a lot of information in a 10-page letter. But it's just still one item. Or a diary is one item with 365 entries. So the numbers kind of depend on the situation. We do also have some e-resources with some free access collections. And some of our collections have been digitized by third parties. So subscription databases ProQuest History Vault is a common one, Fold 3 with the National Archives and Ancestry.com. Some of those collections, our microfilm has been digitized by the third party, and a lot of universities will have those subscriptions. So in some cases, just because we don't provide it openly on our digital collections page, some folks can still get to that. And we are aware of which collections those are. So if folks reach out to us and they can't visit us, we can hopefully at least redirect them a little bit that way.
Right. So even if it isn't your university, if you're a scholar, you could probably contact them and get permission to access those particular records.
It depends. Subscriptions to third-party databases are very expensive, but things like ProQuest History Vault or Gale primary sources are so invaluable for researchers that many universities do subscribe to them, which is good, especially the Gale primary sources, which is very useful. And what's interesting about those databases as well is that often they'll be constructed in modules. So just because our Pinkerton papers, for example, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which is a fun one, the ProQuest History Vault has that collection, but it's in part of a larger module that's thematic. So it will connect users to relevant collections that are held at other repositories, which is kind of an interesting way to look at it, right? If you're doing your dissertation, you're not going to do your dissertation on only material at the Library of Congress. You're going to expand that web to other agencies or university libraries, whatever it is.
So, so for people who are using the materials they find online, are there, besides giving proper citations, are there other constraints or permissions they should be aware of, or those are spelled out on the site?
Sure. I can actually share that.
Okay.
See if I can share my screen here. Hopefully this brings us to my web here. All right. Here's our digital collections here. This is the digital collections landing page for the entirety of the Library of Congress. There's some featured content. Many people are familiar with the Farm Security Administration. Chronicling America is a fantastic resource for historical newspapers. We do allow folks to narrow their search to the division, which is helpful for us. That's going to be the manuscript division. We do supply, where we can, relevant copyright information. So in some cases, it's very clear, and sometimes it's not. The Library of Congress, just in general, does not own its material, so it can't formally grant or deny permission for use, but we can advise and we can share the information that we have. Often the collections that are on this presentation space are either there are not copyright restrictions, or there's permission to share that for educational purposes. Material that is still restricted in some cases is going to be found in what's called stacks. And that is available on site only. It is not available off site, but that is digital material that is available.
I see.
But sticking to things that folks can access remotely from where they are, anywhere. So for example, you have the Alexander Graham Bell family papers. This collection is not entirely online, it's selections. And so if folks did come into the manuscript reading room, we are going to serve the originals in most cases for this collection because it's not complete. For collections that have been digitized in their entirety or are available on microfilm, we don't serve those originals just for preservation purposes. It's often just to make sure that that fragile material stays protected, and the presidential papers are a good example of that. But we always do, our specialists do a fantastic job. They create accompanying articles and essays. They highlight some material. They give the background of that content. But they also supply rights and access information, which includes some suggested information. Every collection is different. And so it's important to read through it and access it. And of course, if there's questions, we encourage people to just reach out to us. We're happy to answer those questions. At the bare minimum, what we hope people will do, let's see if there's the Library of Congress does provide some guidance on citing primary sources. But often when we get this question about citations, every publisher is a little bit different. We don't,
Mhm.
we don't know if you're using APA, MLA, what type of Chicago style that you're using. So our recommendation is if someone is reading your paper, if someone is reading your work, can they get back to this item?
Right.
So we ask if it's an original item that's not online, are you including the container number, the collection name, our division, and the Library of Congress?
Mhm.
So if you're working on a citation, you ask yourself, can the person reading this trace their steps and get back to this item pretty
Mhm.
easily?
Mhm.
That's a great rule of thumb.
Mhm.
When it comes to digital material, let me see if I can open an item just as an example. I have a brochure here from the School of Vocal. What this is some of the interesting documentation on deaf and visible speech studies and in the Family Bell papers. We do have a rights and access statement also at the bottom of each of those. The cite this item may or may not be accurate for folks,
Mhm.
depending what they need. So often, we see Zotero or citation generators. They're helpful, but you should always double check to make sure that they match the needs. But in this case, it tells you it's from the brochures section with a date and where it's from. And in this case, they link to the digital item. That's not
Mhm.
always possible, but it's a good suggestion. It'll
Right.
get someone right back to this location.
What do you wish that archival researchers knew when they're approaching, the use of either on-site or digital materials? What
Yeah.
suggestions do you have for people who may be considering this kind of research? I mean, from my point of view, this kind of research could be useful whether you are doing academic research and writing for formal scholarly work, but also if you're a journalist or you're doing, other kinds of nonfiction or memoir and you want to find the historical context for your era. So it
Yeah.
seems to me there are, a lot of ways that someone might find this material of use. So what do you
What
suggest?
do you need to know? Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And I like that you ask this question because often we have people say, well, I'm not a real researcher. I'm just doing some genealogy, or
Mm,
not really a researcher. I'm just interested, or I'm just a student doing my paper. All of those are researchers. Everyone is a researcher. And
mm,
so we really want to instill a sense of confidence that you do belong here.
mm,
Um, Whether it's just a personal interest and you're working on an interest piece, if you're a journalist, if you're writing a nonfiction book. So when folks come in, we first want them to know that you can always write to us. We want people to write to us through Ask a Librarian. We want them to call us because we want to set them up for success. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's filling out a form feels impersonal and people are always worried they're not going to get a reply. And sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it's faster. But um, first and foremost, just get in touch with us because we
mm,
want to help make that the most successful visit. Um, there's other little details that are important for folks to know, and there's misconceptions, I think, if you haven't been in the archives for a long time. One is that not every item, it's not item level indexed, or in other words,
mm,
you can't say, do you have a letter related to this obscure monument in the center of Minnesota? Maybe we do, but it requires you to step back and have a little bit of a broader knowledge. Who might be common monument designers, architects, artists, or what time period was it? Were there bills being passed that this might show up in a
mm,
relevant conversation? So every item isn't indexed. And if it were that easy, it would be like Google. You would just bring up any item you could possibly want. So I think one thing is that you do have to do the legwork, starting with secondary sources, reading contextual information, and you as the researcher are going to know more than we are probably. We are generalists and we have 13,000 or over 12,000 collections. We're certainly not going to know every piece of paper
mm,
that's in
mm,
there. I will say some of my colleagues have been here for 40 years and they're brilliant. They'll tell you there's a
mm,
letter in box 624 of this collection. But some folks will say, can you just check your special index? Can you check the card catalog? And those are still at a higher level. Those are still subject specific or folder level or box level. And so as frustrating as it can be, it's also part of the fun is the hunt, right?
Right.
And so knowing context and being willing to let the archives kind of steer you. I always kind of picture it like a spider weaving a web, and they start with the main threads that go out and then keep connecting them, and you see different designs, and they get distracted in one side, and then a little bit of art is coming out of there. And sometimes you collect a lot of material that's not relevant to your topic, but you never know how it'll be useful in the end. And so people coming in with an open mind, people willing to ask questions, willing to accept that it's not clearly defined in every sense, that every item is not readily pulled, and that we don't have these tidy little bundles specifically organized for your topic. If you're doing a topic that's new and unusual, you're the first one to do it maybe. And so it's not going to be predetermined for you.
Right. And you know, to kind of plan your time accordingly, you know, to realize that, you know, reading through original source material is, you know, it is time consuming, but you don't know where those, you know, kind of gems will turn up. So
exactly,
you know, that is kind of the fun of it, at least to people like me, because I love to read. So just one as my last question, you know, what thinking in terms of kind of the big picture for archives and archival research, you know, what kinds of trends do you see?
Well, the question could be applied into many different aspects of the experience for a researcher. Through the pandemic, you know, we reverted to very much remote service. And so we were doing a lot more reference scans and trying to help people answer their questions much more independently. Like, so we would kind of be almost acting researchers for them. And then when we returned on site and folks returned to the room, it went back to, you know, you kind of have to come and visit and do research yourself. The expectation, though, for scans to be sent to people seems to linger a little bit. And I don't say that because we're unwilling, but it's more the capacity for us has changed. During the pandemic, all we did was answer remote questions in terms of reference requests. But when we have people back in the room, sometimes we'll have 30 people sitting there submitting call slips, asking questions, standing right in front of us. So I think it just fluctuated the demand on reference librarians, and the expectation for the remote work remained high while the in-person experience returned and continued as well. So it's almost like a mountain grew out of that. But, you know, something that's interesting that has changed very quickly is the technology that enables people to create digital surrogates for themselves in the room. So, you know, a lot of folks used to make photocopies and would leave an archive with a stack of papers they copying material. That still happens occasionally, but we'll also see folks who maybe they don't have a sabbatical for the semester and they only have 1 week, or they only have their spring break to come in, and they will just take thousands upon thousands of digital images of material and then take it home and spend that time back home. And funding for visiting is also, we hear from researchers, is especially right after the pandemic, was quite limited. A lot of folks did not have the funds to travel, or did not feel willing to or safe doing to, whatever reason it is. Traveling to our archive is still a major impediment for some scholars, especially international scholars. But it seems like we're returning to normal, and the visitation is back to what it used to be, but folks are making a lot more copies a lot faster and bringing it home. And they also still expect a lot of remote assistance but we're the same small team of staff. So I hope I'm conveying that correctly, because we're certainly willing, but our capacity,
Right. It's just a matter of kind of basic courtesy and respect to understand that, you know, but you know, to ask, you know, what can you do? What can't you do? I mean, as you say, you know, you've got, and I will highlight the link in the post accompanying the video where the Ask the Librarian link is, where, you know, so you've got a, you know, an entry point to start, and then, you know, you can find out whether, what you want is realistic or not, and, how to proceed.
And sometimes too, it just depends on the way the question is asked. Back to your other question of what I wish researchers would know is sometimes we'll get reference questions that just say, I'm looking for a letter from Thomas to Benjamin from 1836. And that's all we get. We don't have any context or anything like that. Sometimes that's enough for us to go off of. We may just be familiar with kind of what's going on. But then sometimes we'll carry on a conversation and our researchers will send us the article where it was cited. They'll provide more context that they already had. And so if you have a question and you're trying to track down a letter but it's giving you pause, send everything you've got, send it our way. We are masters of the sleuth kind of, we get a lot of joy out of solving those problems. But the more information people provide us, the better. We are, as many librarians are, your secret's safe with us. If you're working on a book, if you're working on a topic, we respect that privacy and we don't share that information with other patrons. And so once we gain the trust of our patrons who are working on a book and, rightfully are trying to protect their creative ideas or their new thoughts, whatever's going on, librarians are like your therapist. What happens in the room stays in the room, but we'll help you get to that point. Just don't feel shy about sharing what you need.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this information, and I hope this will be useful to our readers who are, thinking about, how to access, different kinds of materials. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.